You've already seen the moment everyone remembers. You've watched the stone fly. You've watched the giant fall. You've even watched a young shepherd step out of anonymity and into history. But what the story does not rush to tell us, and what most people never pause long enough to sit with, is what happens when the noise fades and the meaning begins to settle. Because the story did not end in the valley. It shifted. Thus, David did not go home, and that detail matters more than we tend to realize. If you let yourself linger there for a moment, not as a reader scanning for the next event, but as a person trying to imagine what it feels like to stand inside that silence, you begin to sense the weight of what changed. David did what was asked of him. In fact, he faced the threat no one else would face. He delivered what the army could not deliver. And yet, instead of being released back into the familiar, he found himself held in place by a future he did not ask for. Scripture tells us that Saul took him that day and would not let him return home. It does not explain the conversation. It does not record a farewell. It does not describe a pause where David gathers his things or sends word ahead. It simply moves him from the battlefield into the presence of power, as though one life has ended and another has begun without ceremony. That kind of transition does not feel triumphant. It feels disorienting. If you imagine David standing there, still catching his breath, still aware of the smell of dust and iron in the air, you can almost hear the questions forming before he knows what to do with them. Not questions he would dare to speak, because he now stands in the king's world, and the king's world does not welcome uncertainty voiced out loud. But questions that live quietly in the chest, pressing just enough to be felt. So, why today? Why now? Why does no one send word to my father? Why am I kept when I expected to return? David has not failed, nor has he overstepped. He has not demanded recognition. And yet, something has shifted around him, and he is perceptive enough to sense it. Scripture tells us Saul watched David from that day forward as if he had an all-seeing eye. That single line carries more weight than it appears to. A look can be admiration, but it can also be calculation. It can be curiosity, but it can also be concern. And David would have known the difference. The attention lingering on him is no longer neutral. It watches, measures, and compares. The women sing. The songs spread. Saul hears his thousands. But David? David hears his tens of thousands. Now, something important you should know. David did not write the song. He did not ask for the comparison. The thing about comparisons is that they do not need permission to take root, and they do not wait for the person being compared to be ready. So, David learns in that moment, something many people do not learn until much later in life. Victory can create as much tension as defeat, especially when it changes how others see you. And still, he stays. Scripture does not tell us if David argued. From what it says, it does not tell us he resisted. To this day, it remains unknown if he demanded clarity or explanation. It simply shows us a young man who remains steady, while the ground beneath him subtly shifts. He plays the harp and serves the king. He moves carefully through a space that no longer feels entirely safe, even if the danger has not yet announced itself. If you sit with that for a moment, you begin to see that David's strength here is not in his courage, but in his restraint. Not in what he does, but in what he refuses to do. He does not weaponize his victory. While he could have rehearsed his victories before King Saul, he did not. This shows just how loyal David was to King Saul and the one who reigned over him. Claiming authority that did not belong to him was not on David's bucket list. He waits. Waiting like this is not passive. It is observant and deliberate. It is the kind of waiting that watches faces, listens to tone, and notices when silence lingers too long. From Saul's side, the story is different but no less human. Saul is king, but kings still feel fear. They still sense when favor begins to move. They still hear the way songs land in a room and recognize when admiration shifts away from them, even slightly. Fear rarely announces itself loudly at first. It studies, it watches, it pretends to be reason. David feels that look settle on him. He learns quickly that proximity to power brings exposure, not safety. And yet, he remains present, steady, careful, as though something inside him understands that survival now depends on wisdom more than strength. At some point, you have to imagine David wondering whether this is the cost of obedience. You know, whether doing exactly what was asked has placed him on a path he cannot step off. Whether the quiet life he knew in the hills has already slipped too far behind him to return. Scripture does not tell us what David's mother thought. It does not record her voice, her hesitation, her fear, or her pride. We are not given her reaction. What we do know is how his father responded when the king declared David would not return home, and how quickly the family understood that something had changed. But even without those details, we understand enough about human hearts to know that this separation would not have been simple or painless. David stands at the beginning of a long education. Not in battle, but in discernment. Not in strength, but in patience. He is learning how to live inside tension without letting it shape him into someone he is not. This companion moment is not about what David will face next. It is about what has already begun inside him. Can you imagine the awareness that calling does not always arrive gently? Or how the realization that success can place you in rooms where silence becomes strategic? How about the understanding that obedience sometimes means staying, when leaving would feel easier? If you've ever stepped into something bigger than you expected, if you've ever done what was required only to discover that it complicated your life instead of simplifying it, then you already understand this part of the story more than you may realize. Not every victory sends you home. Some victories reposition you, and as the next moments unfold, we will see how fear responds when it can no longer remain quiet, how restraint meets resistance, and how wisdom becomes a form of survival long before it becomes a crown. Now, stop by Sunday, and you'll get the rest of the story. Before you move on, pause here for a moment. David did not leave the field confused about who he was, but he did leave knowing that understanding often arrives after obedience, not before it. What had shifted was not his confidence, but his awareness. He could feel that something had changed around him, even if no one had explained it out loud. There are moments like that in a calling, moments when life moves you forward without offering a roadmap. You are carried into rooms you did not plan to enter, and you are expected to stand there without asking the questions forming in your mind. David was beginning to learn that favor does not always feel like safety, and purpose does not always feel gentle. This moment is not about what he will face next. It is about what has already begun inside him. And that inner shift will matter long before anything else does. Imagine how many lessons can be learned just from these thoughts alone.